This is a sailboat. This is a splashboard. Normally, these two things do not go together. This is Seb Berthe. He has his own sense of style. Seb and his friends are the ones who combined a sailboat and a splashboard in pursuit of an outrageous goal. To achieve it, he's thrown together a merry band of incredibly inexperienced sailors and cast off to sea on one of the best climbing adventures we've seen in the last decade. Along the way, they've dealt with some small volcanic eruptions, a seasick dog, and the challenges of staying strong while at sea, all on their way to climb the hardest route in the world. Meet Seb Berthe and Sebe Van Hey. They're professional Belgian climbers with a bit of an old school style. Whether it's the lycra pants or their fondness of hard multi-pitch routes, Seb and Sebe have always had a unique style and a taste for adventure that's a breath of fresh air in the climbing scene. You may not have heard of them before, but you've definitely heard of the routes that they've climbed. Astroman, the Alpine Trilogy, Super Krakenet, and, the Nose. Not only that though, but both climbers have a unique approach to their expeditions. It's not just about pushing grades for them. For example, Sebe did a big wall expedition in Greenland where he kayaked through the fjords, repeating famous climbs and putting up 3 new multi-pitch routes. It's not just about climbing hard to them, it's about finding new challenges and going on adventures. Berthe's ascent of the Alpine Trilogy, which he did with Nico Favres, is another example. This is a series of 3 big wall routes in the Alps, each of them graded 8B+, which represented the absolute cutting edge of European big wall climbing in the 90s. Berthe and Favres were the first group to ever do the trilogy in a single summer. Not only that, but they cycled between the climbs, adding another level of challenge and uncertainty. This is what Seb loves: uncertainty and adventure. Maybe more impressive than the Alpine Trilogy, though, was the Nose. Prior to heading to Yosemite, Seb didn't have much big wall experience. He had mostly done single-day multi-pitches. Instead of, picking an easier route or even rappelling in and trying some of the hard moves on top rope to see if they were possible, Berthe decided that he wanted to become the first person to ever do a ground-up ascent of the Nose, a climb that only 6 people have ever completed. The Nose ground up is so impressive because of how demanding the route is. There's 3,000 feet of difficult climbing with 2 distinct cruxes. The Great Roof, which Seb crushed faster than anyone else has ever done in history, and the Changing Corners pitch. It was changing corners that gave Seb a lot of trouble, and he might have bailed on the entire trip had he not been able to unlock the sequence on one of his last tries. It was smooth sailing after that, and Seb claimed one of the most impressive ascents we've seen in the valley in recent years. While he was in Yosemite, though, his attention was drawn to a much more ambitious climb just slightly to the right of the Nose. Berthe wanted to come back and really put his big wall experience to the test, but there was a hitch. Soon after he completed his ascent of the Nose, once he had returned to Belgium, Seb made the decision to give up flying due to the environmental impacts it causes. Now, this is obviously admirable, but it posed a bit of a problem for his next project. Belgium and El Cap are pretty far apart, especially if you can't take a plane. Most people would just make an exception to their rule in the name of climbing, but Seb Berthe isn't most people. Instead of breaking his promise to himself, Seb and his friends came up with the type of plan that only Sebastian Berthe would dream of. In lieu of taking a plane, he and a group of fellow climbers would sail across the Atlantic Ocean, landing in Mexico and driving the remainder of the distance to Yosemite. An old-school, environmentally friendly adventure, packing a tiny sailboat full of gear and inexperienced crewmen and heading off into the unknown. Now, I just love this for so many reasons. It's got major Dodo's Delight vibes, except more ambitious. Seb and his crew make the entire thing fun with their own unique style, highlighted in the newsletter that they wrote about the adventure. Everything is painted in a larger-than-life manner. They're not climbers on a boat, they're pirates headed off into the unknown. It's not a tiny sailboat getting tossed around by the waves, making it impossible to walk. It's a dance floor, and they just have to learn the moves. The crew instilled this expedition with endless optimism and fun, and it's nice to see stuff like this still being done in the climbing world. It wasn't all smooth sailing though, metaphorically or physically. On the first stop of the trip, they pulled into the Canary Islands for a bit of a break and some climbing, and the ship ended up coated in volcanic ash thanks to the island's active volcano. Not a massive concern, but also not fun to clean up. Then there was the challenge of getting 7 lifelong climbers and a dog accustomed to life on a boat with all the seasickness and inexperience that comes with that. There never seemed to be enough wind, and their progress was slow to a crawl, and they had to get creative with their food reserves, but together they managed to keep their spirits high. Finally, there was the challenge of training while at sea. This is probably the most remarkable part of this entire trip. When they arrive in Yosemite, Seb and Sebe are going to be trying their hands at the Dawn Wall, far and away the hardest big wall climb in the world. In order to send the brutal 30-pitch route, they'll need to be in peak climbing shape, which is hard to do after you've spent weeks sailing across the Atlantic. So they got creative. The inside of the cabin they turned into a campus board. They slung hangboards and rings wherever they could, smuggled dumbbells and yoga mats on board so that they could keep their bodies strong, and built a fully detachable splashboard that they would put up whenever the ship was still to be able to work sequences and get some semblance of cardio in. Fighting the seasickness and boredom and cramped conditions, Seb and his crew learned and trained and sang their way across the Atlantic Ocean. 25 days later, they were in Guadeloupe. From there, the group ran into some visa issues that rerouted them to Mexico. There were more bureaucratic hurdles they had to cover, mixed in with some climbing to start the process of getting back into shape, and then they hung up their eye patches and retired as pirates. For the next phase of the plan, they would go back to being traditional dirtbags, and that meant buying a bus. Along the way, they stopped for a week at El Salto, a famous Mexican sport climbing crag where Berthe was able to answer the question that had been hanging over everyone's head. What would his fitness level be like after more than a month of not climbing? Turns out his fitness was fine. He climbed dozens of routes 5-12 or harder, including several 13s and a 14A on-site, his hardest ever on-site to date. After that, they got word that the weather was clearing up in California, and so the former pirates hopped back on their bus and drove the final distance to Yosemite. It had taken them an insanely long time to get there, and the hurdles they had to get past were ridiculous, but they were finally here, and the route was waiting. Now, Seb and Sebe are about 3 weeks into projecting the Dawn Wall. For anyone who doesn't know, the Dawn Wall is far and away the hardest big wall climb in the world. It has more pitches of 513 climbing than every other route on El Capitan combined, including the 514D traverse pitch and the 514D dyno pitch. There are thousands of delicate, intricate sequences that need to be unlocked and dialed in until you can climb them confidently in one push after 2 weeks of sleeping on a portaledge and eating minimal food. To date, only 3 people have ever sent the route. 2 of the greatest climbers of all time, and one of the best boulderers of our generation. Berthe, for as good of a climber as he is, doesn't have the experience or strength of someone like Andra or Tommy Caldwell, and that makes it even more audacious that he's chosen this as his goal. The thing is though, I think he's going to do it. Seb Berthe is an incredibly strong climber who's shown that he has the tenacity and patience to succeed on hard, big wall routes. He's the only person ever to send the nose ground up, and he has some really impressive big wall ascents to his name. He might not do it as quickly as Andra, and he might not have the big wall experience of Caldwell, but for my money, Seb and Sebe are going to send the Dawn Wall, and in doing so, they're going to be putting the finishing touches on one of the most audacious, ridiculous, and fun climbing expeditions we've seen in recent memory. Thank you so much for Sebastian Berthe for helping me make this video. If you guys want to learn more about the trip, I would highly recommend checking out the newsletter they wrote, which is available in the descriptions, along with all of Seb's info. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all next time.